Tower of Fantasy is a fun, action-based mobile MMORPG with gacha progression that I've played 40 hours of and plan to play more. It's been ported over to PC, where its technical capabilities can certainly shine the most. It has a brutal first impressions to it, where I'm gonna have to go over a lot of negatives that all come with the caveat of, but the game is fun. Before we get into it, I want to clarify, though this game is often compared with competitors such as Genshin Impact and Wuthering Waves, I have never played any game like this, nor the Zelda game that Genshin Impact drew its inspiration from. This is my first game of this nature, and before now, the only gacha games that I've ever really covered or remember playing is Sword Art Online Integral Factor and Honkai Impact 3rd. I played both of those for like a week, and that's it. I'm coming at this game from the perspective of primarily a PC gamer with a lot of console experience that has played a ton of MMORPGs, and the reason I'm even making this first impression is because this game calls itself an MMORPG. But is it? Because it does come from mobile. I would say, frankly, it's not. When you hear MMORPG, you probably think of something very specific. This is not that. This is a mobile game, and its MMO aspects work no different than, and I forget if this has gacha, Star Wars, what was it, Galaxy of Heroes, that really old mobile game that came out when smartphones were brand new on the market. That is how MMO this is. It's like that. However, I still played it. We're going to cover it. So, getting started from the very beginning. The first time you launch the game is actually a little bit terrifying, because it asks for explicit permission to edit your user registry as well as access your command prompt, and you get to see it run it in front of you. It's somewhat terrifying even to a seasoned PC user like myself that already knows that many games like this edit information, such as in your registry, just without bluntly asking for permission, and this is far from the first game I've seen actually just leave my command prompt open while it runs itself. It's still a little weird, and I can imagine the average user not being very happy about that situation. Once you do get to the main menu, the PC menu is really just a mobile menu, and that really shows how a lot of the rest of the menus and interaction with the game are going to go as we get into the game. One click or tap, and I'll emphasize tap, every tutorial in the game is written with tap. It shows you and tells you everything as if you're interacting with a mobile screen. Nothing actually really teaches you how to play as if you're on a keyboard and mouse or even a controller. It is easy to accidentally one tap the main menu and actually start the game, which is more common of a thing in console games, which are a 0.0001% of the games on the market. So this is especially rare of a thing and a little disorienting as a PC player. I went to go edit my settings first, one misclick, and now I am in a story introduction that I can't escape from without end tasking out of the game. Once you do get a chance to look at the actual graphic settings, as any PC player will do, you will be extremely confused, because it goes for the options low, medium, high, extreme. That's the end, right? Extreme's like ultra. Wrong. There's another setting past that called original. That is the max setting. Very weird, poorly translated wording, and this is very common in the game, even beyond this. This is setting the stage for what you will experience for sure as we go along. There's an anti-aliasing setting that if you change it, it starts changing the font of other options, many of which are not explained at all, such as render accuracy and farsight boost. Playing 40 hours of the game, I still don't know what any of these options are. There's a menu option called compliance, and that just shows where the terms of agreement are. This kind of translation is par for the course for Tower of Fantasy, and you must get used to it because it's going to be everywhere as you play through the game. Once I finally got to the character creator in the game, I found it to be pretty poor, at least for making a male. I hear it's apparently way better for making a female, but I hear that in every game, and I think that's just one of many excuses that individuals make to justify getting to stare at a girl's ass all the time. This is very much one of those character creators where when you move sliders around, the character just looks more and more ridiculous the more you edit it, and many of the options feel very hidden. They're not laid out in a way that I would expect because, again, it's designed for a mobile screen. There's a lot of weird options that are actually buttons that I wouldn't expect to be where they are, that are interactable when I wouldn't expect them to be, because whoever ported this game didn't really take into account any sort of normality on what is normal, in PC games. It is very mobile. If you're coming into this for mobile, maybe you won't notice this. But I had to take 3 or 4 passes through the character creator just to understand what I was looking at. Once you finally get into playing the game, you have a pretty nice introduction. Lets you get to know some characters. It's pretty linear, handheld, and it starts teaching you the basics and introducing you to things. And this is probably the best crafted part of the game. And then it all kind of falls apart when you get out of the prologue, because then it skips you past the entire base game and everything they added up until their 2.0 release. Then it spoils the game through a mixture of showing you cutscenes from the base game as well as loading screens that will spoil the game for you as well, putting you through a sequence where you have absolutely no choice that destroys, again, all cohesion, and ends up begging the question of, why did you introduce me to the 1.0 story if you were going to skip me past it and relegate it to a side quest hidden in my menu so soon? Why not just make a new introduction? After all, they went out of their way to make a section that explains barely that they are skipping you past the base game story. If you can do that, which apparently they didn't do initially, that came later, why not just make a new intro? Because apparently, based on everything I've been told from other players in the game, 1.0 story is terrible. And having played through a lot of it now, I can say it's very poorly communicated, with very long exposition dumps that come out of nowhere, with terrible lip sync and on and off voice acting that sometimes it's there, sometimes it isn't. And I'm not 2.0 yet to be able to tell if this is game-wide or 1.0 wide, but a lot of bugs that we'll talk about in a bit as well. Speaking of voice acting, by the way, though, when there is voice acting, it's honestly pretty good. They went out of their way to get a lot of really good voice actors. However, unfortunately, it sounds like they didn't bother hiring anyone to give them any vocal direction, because the same words get mispronounced, or pronounced differently at least, by not only the different voice actors, but by the same voice actors every other line that they read. The subtitles also, and this increases in frequency as you get further past the prologue of the game, at least through 1.0, do not match up with the voice that's speaking. Different words are used. I've seen this in a lot of very cheap games before, usually cheaply translated, and I'm guessing that's what's happening here. Then, when we finally start getting into the gameplay, I just want to point out that though this is a port, the controls are actually pretty passable. It helps probably that there's not a lot of controls for the combat to begin with. It's a very simple combat system, but it all feels pretty decent in terms of where everything is placed. Unfortunately, mouse bindings are extremely limited. You can't bind anything except the most basic default mouse buttons that would be available on the mouse in the 1990s. No additional mouse buttons can really be bound unless you bind them yourself to emulate keys on your keyboard, for example. When you are in the gameplay and the combat, it is very fun overall. There's a nice variety of weapons, and the combat is a blast when you find the weapons that are correct for you. However, some of the weapons can be a little odd, such as if you have a staff, sometimes you will shoot directly over a small enemy and you can't angle it to hit anything that is below that point. Sometimes if you're wielding, say, a scythe, then you can actually step through enemies and miss them because the enemies don't have colliders. So in both of these cases, some of the weapons just miss their target no matter what you do, because they're really, for the most part, there's exceptions to this, is no aiming, because the combat works through an auto lock system that is designed for mobile, which results in a sometimes jerky experience because it's hard to tell who you're going to hit when you attack, because it selects your target from, actually, I don't know what the order is, but it doesn't prioritize what's in the center of the screen. It doesn't prioritize what you're looking at. It doesn't even prioritize, like, going left to right, like some tab targeting games prioritize. It will attack enemies that are off your screen very commonly, especially when you start working with ranged weapons, but this happens with melee weapons as well. You attack, but you don't know when or where you're going to attack. The most user control is over when you use skills, what skills you use, and when you swap between the 3 different weapons that you get to have equipped, which are also characters, by the way, which you can choose to appear as to gain some buffs, totally negating the entire purpose of designing your own customizable character. The smoothness of the combat that is there, its, jerkiness aside, I want to emphasize that it is smooth because it is fun still to play. In terms of an action game, I can get right into it very easily. I've played many action games. The smoothness, though, is constantly interrupted by some performance issues. The game usually runs at a silky smooth, beautiful, hard-capped, by the way, 120 FPS. However, it is prone to a lot of stuttering, potentially micro-stuttering, and it's not just me. The issue seems to be very widespread across a wide variety of hardwares, and it always seems to happen when assets are loading in, such as if you're moving around, especially if you're moving around quickly, if you're turning the camera and now all the things it culled has to pop back in, and especially when you're loading into an area brand new, can bring your game to a stuttery mess for the next, 5 to 10 seconds. Even on a Gen 4 Crucial NVMe SSD, this doesn't seem to affect anything, as the drive only really runs at like 2% usage, even when this problem is at its worst. It seems to be an Unreal Engine 4 issue, as every workaround I have found involve modifying the game files to force the engine to work in a different way. Where you get to use that combat is, well, in many different locations, as well as the general movement and transportation systems in the game. There are many game options here, including PvE, some co-op, and PvP. There's open world exploration, where you get access to vehicles and other gadgets to help you get around. Many of these options are quite limited by the mobile-like UI, where you can only really bind 2 of certain things at once, and you have to have sets you swap between rather than just being able to bind everything to different keyboard keys, because they didn't bother wanting to put in that extra mile for the port, and this is a recurring theme in a lot of things in this game. There are vehicles as well that you can travel in, but the speed on them is pretty much all the same, with the exception of rare skills that can change it, but still pretty limited, probably because they know there's a loading issue. There's a lot of challenges as well as battle royale. There's an endless tower mode, which I think will mean more to those that play a lot of Asian games than otherwise, because I've only ever heard this description used by those that do, and that seems to be the demographic this appeals to. If you don't know what I'm referring to, though, then it's kind of just referring to a mode where you can go up in number or down pretty much infinitely for small rewards every number, with intermittent points where you get big rewards and checkpoints in a way. There's a trickle of limited time events and so many mini games I can't count them. However, expansive as all this might be, I want to highlight it only does these things just barely okay. Just like the port itself. It feels like the bare minimum effort was put in to actually get these things in the game. All these modes and options are very fun to use and interact with, but very basic and bare bones. They all feel like demos for something larger, and I find myself saying that every time I try something new. This is fun, but it feels like a demo. I wish there was more. Tower of Fantasy has no focus that I can find, and all of this variety, most of which was added over time, leads to more menus and currencies than I can count. I've heard MMORPGs having a bloat of currencies. Wait till you see Tower of Fantasy. Every day, I've played 3 days of 12-hour sessions, as well as some time not on stream as well. I have spent hours every day so far just navigating menus. There's umpteen, as I mentioned, different currencies that are not all plainly listed in the dedicated currency section. Sometimes you just have to learn what currency leads to another currency, or other currencies in general. Same thing goes for menus. There's so many menus, you get prompted with dozens of them, literally dozens of them, while you're still looking at the game world. And you have to go into some of them to get access to other ones. Sometimes you'll go down like a rabbit hole. We have to go through 4 different menus to get to what you're looking for. You can't go back one step either. The moment you hit escape, you're going right back into the game world. You cannot back up in a lot of these instances, and so you have to go down again. And I have had a big problem where there's just so many of these menus that when I accidentally back out of one, I no longer even remember where the heck the menu I was just on was. Especially on my first day. It was a constant impossibility to figure out. It's a lot harder than it sounds if you're just listening, like, oh, I could memorize it. Could you, though? Could you memorize a brand new user interface of dozens of menus, each one leading to dozens more underneath it, all within your first couple hours of playing? I feel like you couldn't. The further you get into this game as well, the more menus and currencies they drop on you as they open up new features. Again, I played 40 hours of this game and they're still introducing new ones. I'm still missing one of the most basic ones, in fact, from what everybody told me. And the menus are probably the single most daunting part of being a new player in this game. If anything would have gotten me to quit on my first day, it would have been this, but I decided to keep going, and I'm glad I did, because as I mentioned, the combat is fun, and the progression is fun as well. We'll talk about that shortly. It is good to note, with everything I've covered so far, though, the Tower Fantasy, it really does seem to cheap out on everything, skipping us past an apparently bad 1.0 rather than fixing it. Was already a huge sign of that, but jumping on every gaming trend in the book and turning it into a half-assed, unfinished feeling mode is certainly another. This also shows in the technical limitations of the game. It is very buggy. I have to restart it constantly, several times a day, because my controls will start locking up. Quest markers constantly break. Quest dialogue breaks, interjecting this weird sentence, something like, "the people we should have never forgotten," into everything, overriding important, what would have been voice acted, quest dialogue, and making me very confused about what actually happened in any given scene. Very confused next as things get referenced, and I don't remember them. Unable to now tell if I have simply not paid attention, if the game did not explain something to me, or if it was overridden by some strange bug that eats dialogue. Now, getting into the character progression, it is heavily influenced by your map completion. Collecting things like dark crystals, one of many currencies. This one that will allow you to purchase things you need to roll for characters that are actually weapons, where every newly released character that you can kind of get to with this currency, one of the rarest in the game, is apparently stronger than the last, leading to what I hear is a never-ending power creep that apparently its competitors lack. The map completion is a nightmare, since many things on it are completely unmarked and require a lot of luck to stumble upon. You can use third-party tools to assist you, and I've started using them now, after clearing about 4 different maps to 100%. However, some of these things actually evade third-party tool knowledge because they don't count towards the 100%, or because they are non-standard simply, even if they do count towards the 100%. This can also be problematic because the game marks very clearly with an Assassin's Creed-like tower system, at least on the first, 1.0, that you can unlock the map, but some things that count for 100% in certain areas are hidden behind those unmarked areas, leading you to be completely unaware of what you've done wrong, unless you can find the correct third-party tool or other player that has already been through this same problem. You can bypass all of this grind and inconvenience, however, if you want, by spending real money, because everything in the game can be purchased with real money somehow. There's so many things to buy, in fact, that I don't even know where to begin. Usually I would highlight the different things you can pay to win with, but this game lets you pay for literally everything. There are several different subscriptions that you get prompted for upfront, as well as an infinite ability to buy into every important resource in the game via premium currency exchanges. As for the length of the game, I think the game length is good. You get into this now, and there's a lot here waiting for you. However, that's primarily from the perspective of a free-to-play player that hasn't spent a cent, mostly because he's too overwhelmed by all the many different things hidden in endless menus asking me to spend money. I don't even know what would be good to spend on to begin with. Most of that gameplay is going to be spent running around collecting everything in sight. Pick up one thing, there's 5 different things in sight for you to pick up. Well, at least on your minimap, because there's no markers on the map, and many things do not pop in until you're directly on top of them. It is very inconsistent in that way. The story itself, based on my own progression through it so far, as well as one of my own viewers, can be burned through much faster if one does not stop to grind, maybe even within a week, depending how much you play in a given day. And that's including all story up to where we are right now, because it starts out strong and then falls off in length pretty quickly, even through 1.0, and someone I know is getting through entire 2 to 3.0, for example, in a singular day of play. Overall though, what do I think after my 40 hours? I think Tower of Fantasy is a fun game, and I haven't really played anything like it before. It has fun combat, and the sense progression is engaging if extremely random, due to the gacha. I won't even begin to try to explain the gacha, because I really don't understand it that well. It seems like an unfair and predatory casino, and I wouldn't want to spend a single cent on it, because that seems pretty self-abusive, and I don't want to do that to myself. But it's probably one of the most pay-to-win games I've played in my entire life, with more bloat and less depth than MMORPGs that have been out for 4 times longer than it, with constant expansion cycles. Would I recommend it? I mean, sure, if nothing I mentioned before now is an absolute deal breaker to you, like I said, it is fun. It just has all these issues that seem to arise from the fact that it is trying to be your average predatory mobile pay-to-win game. It's trying to be that, and it's trying to do the bare minimum in every single instance. If you can get past that level of jankiness and get past the monetization scheme, then I think there is a fun experience to be had here in the gameplay if gameplay is what you're looking for. If story is what you're looking for, maybe not. If linear progression is what you're looking for, definitely not. If a standard MMORPG or any other PC MMORPG experience is what you're looking for, certainly not. But if you do want the ability to do some stuff with friends in a mostly solo experience with the descriptors that I've given you so far, yeah, it can be pretty fun. Don't expect to play it like an MMORPG, as I clarified in the beginning, however, because it's really not one. You cannot play the story with friends. You cannot do any of the open world activities that I've seen so far with friends. It will just tell you no. Anything permanent has to kind of be done in your own locations, and if you pick up randomly spawning loot in each other's worlds, the other players simply cannot loot it themselves, kind of sort of stealing the reward. There are dedicated multiplayer modes, however, a lot of them allow you to auto-resolve them with the same efficiency anyway, and so there's virtually no point to doing any of the multiplayer anyway that is in the game. It is very solo. It's probably the most solo self-proclaimed MMORPG I've played in my entire life. Regardless, I have enjoyed my first 40 hours and 3 days playing the game, and plan to continue it soon. I'll probably edit this a couple days after that and post it a week after that. I certainly plan to continue playing the game. Who knows how far I will get. If you plan to get into it, then certainly best of luck to you. I hope you can have fun with this game for what it is, as I have been doing. I hope this first impressions has been helpful to you, and seeing my experiences has given you some idea of what you can expect for yourself. I know it was mostly going over cons and not gameplay features or whatever, but most of my first impressions hasn't been gameplay features, it's been everything I've gone over. For now though, thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.